Hi, and welcome to the Unhinged History Podcast, the podcast where two people compulsively study history and then join forces and tell each other the stories we have just recently learned. I'm Theresa. I'm host number one.
I'm Angie. I am host number two.
Dun, da, da, da.
Boom, 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 boom.
Yep, pretty much.
And that's our intro music for the day.
Yeah, that is. I mean, ignore the intro music you heard just before this, though.
Please. Yeah, that
Yeah,
wasn't it. This
that
is it.
that was created by a friend and former coworker of mine. But so shout out to Aaron because music's awesome. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Aaron.
You make us better. Um,
Truly.
Now, I know I went first last time. Um,
You did.
I did. I did because I covered the maple syrup or the maple syrup, the
You
molasses flood. I don't know
you
why
sure
my
did.
brain wants to say that every single time because I know it's not maple syrup. I know it's molasses. I even covered it. We don't use maple syrup in munitions. We use molasses. These are things.
Did you ever think that was going to be a sentence that you said? We don't
You,
use maple syrup in munitions. We use molasses. Like,
you know,
that's how you make the
honestly,
cookie.
I stopped paying attention to things I never thought I would say for the most part.
That's fair.
I mean, the second I was just like, no, kiddo, we don't need to lick the dog. I think that's when I realized
You're a
I've said it
mom.
all. I've
There's
said
going
it
to be all
all.
sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking of all the things I've said or other moms near me have said. I'll pe keep them all in the brain locker.
Yeah. I
It's
mean, you
fine.
have boys, so typically it involves genitalia.
Surprisingly enough, I have had to say very little about genitalia with them.
Congratulations. I feel you're out of the
I
danger zone.
know. Well, we are teenagers now.
Okay.
So
So the
we're out of the
maybe,
toddler danger zone.
yeah, but now the dangers have ratcheted up a bit. Now you're beyond this is embarrassing more to this is now criminally liable.
Yes,
No one's going to prosecute a 3-year-old for running through a stadium with no diaper.
that's true. Fortunately, I think you know what, I'd like to say both of my children are just modest enough to not do that, but I got one that he's shifty. You don't know. He might.
I won't even try to hazard a guess because I don't want to injure feelings if they either
You
listen
wouldn't
to
you
this
wouldn't injure
episode.
feelings, but the one that would knows he would, so he would
Mm.
just be like, "You got it, Teresa. Nailed
But
it."
I just don't want the other one being like, me? But I'm so reserved. And the other one being like,
I
how come
would
she didn't
never.
assume it was me?
I'm insulted.
Like my Halloween costume was just going to be a censor sign. I was making a pixelated cardboard sandwich board, like I was just going to wear it in a nude
Oh
morph
my
suit.
God. You are a monster, and I wholly believe you know inside your head which child would say those type of things just for the fun of saying them.
Mm, I won't say
Hmm.
it out loud though. It's better inside.
It's okay. It's yeah, keep it inside. Use your
So,
inside thoughts.
so what's your story? Well, I take
Um,
this hard segue.
uh, okay, I can go. So I'm gonna go first. I hope I don't take up all of our time.
I'm okay if you do,
Um,
because actually you told me off camera that you have a long story, and that's fine
I
because
do.
my story is surprisingly light.
Okay. All right. I'm going to start my story and then I will give you my sources. So please don't be mad at me.
I'm always mad at you.
Um, that's true. Please be less than mad at me about it. You're gonna get my sources. They're coming. And they're not coming at the end, so that's good. In his time, he's known as the hero of two worlds. He was the surrogate son to Washington, the friend of kings, but we know him today as America's favorite fighting Frenchman.
Lafayette.
Yep. So my sources are colonialwilliamsburg.org, Britannica, History.com, 10 things you may not know about the Marquis de Lafayette. Historythings.com, the life of revolutionary Marquis de Lafayette. I had to spend a stupid amount of time reading about French nobility and titles, so there's a website just for that. The Battle of Yorktown, that's AmericanHistoryCentral.com. World History Encyclopedia, which I don't know if you've ever had the chance to peruse the World History Encyclopedia, but it's freaking amazing.
Is it
I love it. I discovered it in one of my last art history classes, and it's been like one of my favorite sources.
better than the
I
Park
actually
Service? Not that we're going to have a ton from the Park Service
different
here.
different than the Park Service. It's this is gonna sound really weird, but if you get it, you get it. It's like if you took the Met and you put it on a website, which the Met has a website, but it's got the same really just straightforward layout. There isn't a ton of like oogly things to look at. It's just the information in a really concise, beautiful way. And I love that. I can't stand websites that are like flooded with all sorts of things to look at. And the World
Mm,
History Encyclopedia gives you the information. And if there's images, if there's art, whatever, you get to see the art, but it's done very beautifully.
they
And
care
so
about the
I'm
user
just here for that.
experience.
Yes. Yes, that exactly. The user experience. There is a podcast called My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. And I love that. And then a really great YouTube presentation by Biographics. So, with that said, those are my sources. I'm going to need you to sit with me while I go through this incredibly difficult paragraph of my life. Marie, Joseph, Paul, Yves, Roche, Gilbert, de Motier, Marquis de Lafayette was born September 6, 1757, in the small village of Chavignac in Haute-Loire, which is the Auvergne region, or more easily said, South Central France. He's born in a really beautiful region to a really noble family on both sides. Like their family history goes back for centuries. His mother's side is probably even more renowned than his father's side, and they are just kind of favorites. Their family history is entwined in all of French history in the easy, as the easiest way to say it. It's actually a fun note about his name. In his autobiography, he would jokingly say, "It's not my fault. I was baptized like a Spaniard with the name of every conceivable saint who might offer me more protection in battle." So I think that shows that he has quite a sense of humor, and I thought that was so fun to include. Okay, so now that I've said the hard part, I'm just gonna call him either G the General or Lafayette for the rest of the story because 10 names is a lot, you know?
I mean, it is. It honestly harkened me back to, and this is a very dated reference, Animaniacs,
Oh my
when
gosh, yeah.
at one point in one episode, Dot introduces herself and it takes 30 seconds to get through all of these names, and she ends it with da 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 da, the third.
Yes,
And you're like,
exactly.
holy cow, what did I just listen to?
We're going with Dot. Get see why she did it. Um, Before he's 2 years old, he suffers the first great loss of his life. His father, Michel de Lafayette, was killed at the Battle of Minden, which is part of the Seven Years' War. Um, just for posterity, it must be said he was hit by a cannonball on August 1st in 1759.
Ooh.
Yeah. And I think we don't often get to know how the tragic parent dies, but his was by cannonball. So there's that. Though the estate goes to his mother, Maria Louise, which I think is awesome, Lafayette immediately inherits the title and would later inherit the vast fortune attached to it upon his mother's death. Now, for whatever reason, Maria Louise, likely devastation, but it's kind of unclear, leaves for Paris, where both her father and grandfather live. She does not take Lafayette with her.
Wow.
Instead, yeah, I thought that was a little bit odd, but who knows? Who knows the real reason why she left? But Lafayette is instead raised in Chavagnac by his father's mother, his grandmother. Her name is Marie Catherine de Soult de Chavagnac de Lafayette. So, and she's a remarkable woman. She would prove to be this massive influence on all of his great qualities. She's generous, she's smart, she's clearly very caring, and she just has all of these qualities I think you would imagine to be in a great grandmother. Like she has them all and she passes them down and she raises him right. When he's 11, Lafayette does join his mother and great grandfather in Paris at the apartment in the Luxembourg Palace. Grandpa, I'm sure, decides that Lafayette was to carry on in his family's martial tradition and was immediately enrolled at the University of Paris at the College of Plessy. To further train him, Lafayette's great-grandfather would also send him to join the program for future musketeers. And when I read that, first of all, I don't know if you know this, but like one of my first great loves was D'Artagnan. So, um, more specifically, just the story as a whole, like Aramis couldn't be any cooler in my book than he is, and all I ever wanted to be was D'Artagnan growing up, right?
Mm.
So when I read that, I freaked out. And I don't know for sure, but so he, as a young man, like, between 11 and 13 years old, he joins this program for future musketeers. And honest to God, the first thought that went through my mind was like, oh, so like an ROTC program.
Wow. You're not wrong. I can't, like,
Like,
I don't think I would have made that connection, but yeah.
yeah, right? That was immediately where my brain went. He would eventually become a full-fledged musketeer, and he served 6 years riding with the Black Musketeers. Black being the color of their horses. I think that's a pretty cool fact.
And you
They
say
were,
that, and I'm like, The Musketeers was written by a black man, so I assumed you meant like,
so did I, actually. So that's why I included the note about it being the color of their horses, because I wondered if there was a regiment of just black soldiers. But they were actually delineated by the color of either their uniform or the color of their horses. So he rode with the mounted musketeers, and all of their horses were black.
interesting.
Can you
Okay.
imagine that visually? Like,
Yeah, that is stunning.
mm,
Now I need The
right?
Musketeers with Crystal Donald to be redone.
It, yes.
Tim Curry needs to stop editing audiobooks and get back into doing this.
You had one job, and that was to be Richelieu. I need you to get it together, my friend. I need to, one more time here. Come, D'Artagnan, we're going to save the king. On August 3rd, excuse me, April 3rd of 1770, when he was just 13, he experiences the next tragedy when his mother dies. And then just a couple of short weeks later, his great grandfather on the 24th of April.
Oof.
So now he is your classic novel character. He's orphaned and ridiculously rich. It's safe to say that he inherited one of his nation's largest fortunes. When I say ridiculously rich, at his grandfather's death, he receives 25,000 livres, which today, assuming the math is mathing, would be around $11.2 million dollars. And
And that's
then,
wow. And he's already
yeah,
got cash.
right, and he's only 13. And then he would receive a yearly income of 120,000 livres, which today I think would be about 53 and some change million.
Okay, now that's weird to me that he is a notable positive historical character because I would assume that amount of wealth coming in at that age and power would lead to him just being a rake.
You would think that, right? But I think, first of all, his family is they're known for their martial commitment and their military prowess. And I think he just really, even as a little guy, had ideas of what he wanted his life to be like. I think he had goals and he was going to set out to achieve them. And then couple that with his grandmother's raising, I think he was just raised to do the right thing, and he didn't let the power and the money go to his head until it became useful, and I'll get to that in a little bit.
Oh,
Um, And I won't say that even then it went to his head. I'll just say that he knew what to do with his money when the time came for it. So he's young, he's rich, he's educated, he's handsome, and he is at the French court where all young, rich, beautiful people of the time would be hanging out, right? And you would think, Rake, okay, he's living his very best life. Like he could be a gentleman of leisure. No one's ever gonna like he's never have to lift a finger. He's gonna end up marrying this beautiful little lady down the street, whatever. Like you think he's gonna have a charmed life.
This feels
He hates
very
it.
Bruce Wayne lifestyle
He
without the Batman.
hates it. Yeah, no Batman. He hates court. He doesn't have anything to do with it. He's bored to death there. But he does meet and marry his wife. In 1774, he marries one. I see if I can pronounce this right. I really struggled with her name last night when I was practicing. Adrienne Knollys. She is gorgeous and she deserves a story all on her own. And I'm going to be honest, that story may be coming sooner than you think because I was completely taken by her side of the story. Um,
Okay.
Basic gist is she comes from another incredibly powerful French family, and her father continues to set Lafayette up for becoming like the ultimate gentleman. Like he gives him a spot in his dragoons, he's a commissioned lieutenant. There's all of these things that happens that continue to kind of excel Lafayette's
Power begets power.
rise. Yeah, power, exactly. Power begets power. But anyway, he's partying with the king, he's rubbing elbows, he's friends with Marie Antoinette. Um, all the things. And I'm just gonna say, when I was doing the research for this story, my brain could not reconcile the amount of things that happens in this man's life and the amount of people he knew. Like the American Revolution happens in a different universe than the French Revolution happens in my brain.
I
Like
get
I
it.
know they're
Yeah.
related, I know, right? But like they're so segregated in my brain. So to realize that in the same lifetime, you idolized George Washington while partying with Marie Antoinette is just insane for my brain. But here you are. This is the time and the place he's in. History doesn't happen in a vacuum, as we so often mention. So one night at dinner, it's 1775. He's been called to Metz to be part of the militia there, and
Hmm.
he attends a dinner. MountVernon.org says, quote, with the Duke of Gloucester, the young brother of the British King George III, the Duke complained about the American colonists who had risen up against British rule. He mocked their revolutionary beliefs in the equality of mankind and the right of people to rule themselves. The Duke further explained how the colonists had organized the Continental Army under the leadership of General George Washington. Lafayette would always remember this dinner as a turning point in his life. He's quoted as saying, my heart was enlisted. He later confesses in his memories, and I thought only of joining my colors to those of the revolutionaries. So,
Wow.
right? At this point, one could say he becomes single-minded in his goal to get to America. He circumnavigates all sorts of orders from everyone that matters, including the king himself. And as ushistory.org says, he made clandestine arrangements with Silas Deane, a secret liaison between France and the colonies, to travel to to America and join the revolutionary cause. So at this point, what happens next is a little confusing, but the general gist is this. He either A, purchases his passage to the west, or quite possibly even the boat itself. And then when the captain wants to go to the West Indies to sell the goods that are on the ship, get rid of his cargo
Yeah.
there, Lafayette is like, yeah, absolutely not, because if the king finds out I'm in one of his colonies, I'm toast. Like,
Mm,
I've royally pissed the king off by going west. He told me not to, and I did anyway. So he just buys all the cargo himself and convinces the captain to not stop in the West Indies.
that's a
Um,
power move.
right? I love that for him. On June 13, 1777, Lafayette finally arrives in America. He arrives near Georgetown, South Carolina. On the voyage over, Lafayette has taught himself some English, words, phrases, things like that, and it takes him only a year in America to be able to speak the language fluently.
Nice.
Right? So he's coming, he is preparing, he's already done a ton of research on the American politics and kind of what's going on in the West and things like that. So he's coming prepared. When he finally arrives in Philadelphia, he meets Congressman James Lovell of Massachusetts, who adamantly refuses to receive him, saying that the Americans were tired of ambitious Frenchmen seeking glory. Because many French officers that were coming to aid their cause, regardless of the fact that they're aiding their cause, are lacking both in military and English skills. So he's looking at this young princeling and thinking, absolutely not. You're gonna die on the battlefield before you're even useful. Like, come on, you're just cannon fodder. You're not gonna make it. Um, so he kindly tells Lafayette to take a long walk off a short pier. Essentially.
Yeah.
But it becomes pretty clear how wealthy and well connected he is, at which point Lafayette is made a major general. Like, oh, as it turns out, you have a really deep pocketbook. I guess you can play.
You know, when we measure your intelligence by your money, boy, you've got the highest IQ among us. Right this way.
As it turns out, you can buy the country. This sounds great. So fast forward a really short time, into like a couple weeks, and Lafayette is sent to the general. To quote Lin-Manuel Miranda, the pride of Mount Vernon, Washington. He's at his camp along Brandywine Creek, which is just south of Philadelphia. It's September, it's 1777. And he he's got some proving to do, I think. Here's where the Continental Army is fighting to hold back or stop General William Howe's advance towards the capital. Washington is immediately taken with Lafayette. MountVernon.org says, quote, essentially, when the Marquis explained, I am here to learn, not to teach. Like, that's it. Washington was like, this is my guy. I love him. This is the point at which Washington orders Lafayette to join General John Sullivan's forces. They're in desperate fight on the army's right-hand side. The Redcoats have outflanked Washington and they're trying to surround him. Sullivan finally calls for the retreat. Lafayette reluctantly goes with him, but then he figures out he's actually been shot in the leg. Up to this point, he had no idea. At
Huh.
at this moment, adrenaline, right?
Yeah.
Washington sends his personal surgeon to care for him. He tells the doctors, treat him as if he were my son. And
Oh.
here is where all the sources state their relationship is defined for life. Lafayette would become the son to a childless Washington, and Washington would be the father Lafayette always wanted. Washington had a was known for kind of adopting like anyone younger than him. You know, he was just that kind of fatherly figure. But I think Lafayette had a real special place in Washington's heart from the very beginning, and the rest of their lives would be that way. MountVernon.org goes on to say that after Lafayette recovered, he became a valued member of Washington's close-knit military family. Lafayette, in turn, came to admire Washington's leadership more each day, especially during the winter at Valley Forge. Lafayette was overjoyed with news of the French alliance when news of the French alliance had arrived in early 1778.
Real quick, I
In
realize that I have a logical misstep. I assume, illogically, that all of the founding fathers are the same age, that
they're not,
everybody who
but
participated in the Civil War or the Revolutionary War, same age. So I'm like, Lafayette, George Washington, they're both 35.
yeah, no, about this time Lafayette's only like 19. And Washington, you know what? I didn't look, but I know Washington is older. I could
That's
tell
a
you.
safe
You want to
bet.
know?
That's a safe bet.
I want to say he's more than 10 years older, but off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. Um, yeah, it is funny, and it's also to me like I always illogically assumed they were in their 50s. Like I know that's not true, but the portraits we have of them, they're in their
Right.
50s, you know? But like I just said, Lafayette's only 19 around this time. So we now know that they were much younger when these types of things were happening. But it is still weird how your brain does that, because I agree with you. In June of 1778, after the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse, Lafayette returns to France, hoping to gain more support for the American cause. By the summer of 1781, Lafayette's back. Washington sends him to Virginia to stop British raids along the James River. When Cornwallis's forces arrive in Virginia, Lafayette's job is basically to harass the British general until Washington and Rochambeau can lay siege to him at Yorktown. Okay, I might say this wrong, but I just want to include this. I didn't put it in my notes, but there was a story I was listening to on one of the podcasts that was talking about how shortly before the Battle of Yorktown, there was Lafayette and one other commanding officer, and they basically understand like we're marching to our death. Like there's very little chance we will win. So obviously the soldiers know this, and there are several that just run off, right?
Right.
Um, the other commanding officer shoots his deserters. Lafayette regathers his men as they're kind of pondering over their life, and he says to them, "Okay, fellas, the likelihood we make it out is not real high. You're cold, you're hungry, you're tired, you're all the things. Here's the deal. I'm gonna buy you new boots and new blankets. Can you make it to this fight with me?" And he lavishly spends money on his crew so that they can make it where they need to make it, and he boosts their morale, and he kind of sees what the other officers are doing and how that's really not conducive to great
No,
loyalty
that, yeah,
among
that,
men.
that doesn't really boost the morale.
Right, and he does the exact opposite. And what do you know? All his men come back.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and be like, this is during the day where you had like one pair of boots, if they were solid boots, because you got what you could afford. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna buy you some new high-end best tech we've got at this
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yep. And what do you know? It works.
Yeah.
So the Battle of Yorktown was the decisive battle of the American Revolution. General jo Charles Cornwallis surrenders his army to General Washington October 19, 1781, following a very lengthy siege. To say Lafayette was proud is probably an understatement. Um, Lafayette again returns to France as a hero. 3 years later, on a tour to the United States, he visits Washington at Mount Vernon, and like Washington, he favors the creation of a small, strong central government. But he immediately wants to end slavery. Like, that
Mm,
is his big ticket item. Like, this is, I don't know if you know this, but all our paperwork says, like, we're free men. Like, these
yeah.
are unalienable rights. So what about those guys over there? Like, th they should be free also, right?
Yeah.
Um, he travels to New York where he participates in peace talks with the Iroquois. And then back in France, he helps launch the French Revolution in 1789. He served in the National Assembly and helps draft the Declaration of the Rights of Men. He proudly sends the key to the Bastille to Washington, where it sits today as a symbol of liberty in Mount Vernon. I did not know that, and I think that is so freaking cool. So when the Bastille falls, he takes the key and sends it to Washington.
Wow.
And I just think that's so symbolic and wonderful. But his time in France is more nuanced and convoluted than the straight on like American love for him. But for the sake of time, let's just say he's definitely an American hero, but in France there are a little bit of mixed feelings.
Oh.
Um, and there's reasons why. He's still a hero, but I'll kind of get into it just a little bit. So he's totally involved in the early stages of the French Revolution. He's a member of the Assembly of Notables and the Estate General. On July 11th, 1789, he presents the draft of the Declaration of the Rights of Mankind and the Citizen to the National Assembly, which, interestingly enough, I didn't know if you knew this. I don't recall knowing this, but um, Thomas Jefferson helped him write it.
Huh.
I think that's pretty cool.
That is pretty neat.
Um, so 3 days later, on July 14, French insurgents storm the Bastille. Lafayette is placed immediately in command of the Parisian National Guard, like the next day. And this is the position that puts him at odds with a lot of people. He was viewed as a revolutionary by some and loyal to the king by the rest. And I mean, to be fair, the king was his friend.
Yeah.
But the government he wanted, the government Lafayette wanted, called for a radical overhaul. So, despite the fact that these people are his friends, he is still kind of more on the side of your everyday Joe. That's like, hey, we just need to take care of ourselves and our people. Like this big lavish monarchy might not be the ticket to securing everybody the food and wealth that they need for their own survival. So we need to
Well, and I
figure
gotta
this out.
imagine it's super hard to trust somebody who's been benefiting from the system.
Yeah.
You know, it's like telling the trees to trust the axe because the handle's made of wood.
Yeah. That is a really good analogy. Yeah. Um, so on July 17 of 1791, an incident takes place. It's called the Champ de Mars massacre. This is the event that essentially tarnishes Lafayette's rather perfect record, and it's simply because he's in command of the Parisian National Guard. The basic gist, without getting way into it, is a group of demonstrators come. They're calling for a referendum on the king's abdication, and they want to establish a republic. This is a major turning point for the French Revolution. But what happens is kind of organized chaos. The demonstrators are there, and whether there's purposely people in the audience looking to cause a problem or it's just heated feelings, whatever the case may be, the audience gets riled up, the National Guard fires on them.
Oh.
And it's a big deal. Like there's deaths included, all kinds of problems happen. And all the people there, all they're wanting is a petition calling for the king's abdication. Like it's not supposed to be a violent thing, but it turns into a violent thing. And just because he is the leader of the guard, that kind of ruins his image in the eyes of a lot of people. Whether or not he actually gave the order to fire is irrelevant. It doesn't sound like he did. To me, it reads like something set it off in the crowd,
Yeah.
and then the National Guard retaliates. Whether there's agitators in the crowd is kind of unknown, but that's kind of what I think is happening. And I'm not saying that the people that are calling for the abdication started it by any means. It just seems like it was meant to be a peaceful thing that didn't stay
Well,
peaceful.
I think like I would be curious to look at this through the lens of people who know more about protests than I do, particularly like
Yeah.
from a modern lens, because I'm getting ready to speak out of ignorance here, and I'm just going to start from that position. But I believe the biggest indicator of whether a protest turns violent is the number of police officers in attendance to quell potential violence. The greater the
Yeah.
number of law enforcement amplifies the negative emotions within a crowd and then starts this negative feedback cycle.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And to be honest, to me, it doesn't really matter how it starts, whether it's, two rogue agitators that are just trying to take both sides off or heated emotions, whatever the case may be. How the police respond, I think, really adds to, like you said, how, first of all, how many are there? What is their presence like?
Hmm.
And how are they responding to the situation? And because this is 1700s France, we can't really know all of the ins and outs, right? Like
Right.
we're never going to get the whole. But anyway, it tarnishes his reputation, and it's a bit of a problem for him. On October 5 of the same year, a mob marches from Paris to the Palace of Versailles, and Lafayette and some of the members of the Parisian National Guard follow in tow. When King Louis refuses to leave Versailles and go to Paris, the mob breaks through the gates. Lafayette leads the king, his wife, Queen Antoinette, and their children to the balcony and tries to restore order. The mob is shouting to shoot the queen. Lafayette instead takes her hand and kisses it.
Mm.
And surprisingly, the mob responds with loud cheers. And I think to me that happens because Lafayette, even with the massacre at Champ de Mars under his belt, he is viewed as a man of both people, and they knew it. So his actions to kiss the queen's hand probably spoke volumes to him. Like, we can find a middle ground, people.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. Um, but by August of 1792, the French monarchy collapses, the Reign of Terror starts. Lafayette tries to escape to America, where he's got, all sorts of backing and all sorts of freedom and all the jazz. And in the process of getting there, he flees to Austria, hoping he'd be safe, as others had been safe when they made it to Austria. But he's captured instead and taken prisoner and held until 1797.
Oh,
The Austrians were
geez.
kind of pissed at him. Yeah, they were not happy. He was not one of the soldiers they were going to let go. There's American leaders, including Jefferson and William Short. They try to use political means to free Lafayette. But the best that can be done is to raise funds to send to him so that he and his wife can continue to live comfortably. In all of this, his wife, through the Reign of Terror, and oh, her story is so heartbreaking, and it's gorgeous. She's been incarcerated several times, and most of their families are destroyed during the Reign of Terror.
Oh my gosh.
So just keep that in your noodle noggin there. Um, so the Americans are doing whatever they can to make sure that they're still comfortable. In 1797, Napoleon freaking Bonaparte, of all people, negotiates the release of prisoners in Austria. Lafayette was one of the named prisoners. Like,
Huh.
this is going to happen. Let him go. In March of 1880, Lafayette returns to France to discover that his property and his fortunes, they've been confiscated and are essentially gone because the Reign of
Yeah.
Terror, and he
Yeah.
is landed gentry and all of that, right? He is otherwise offered tons of various prestigious positions in more than one country, like being the governor of Louisiana. But he turns him down because, and I quote, he did not want to support a government that was not democratic in nature. And while he fully supports the American cause and the American system, he is still like, hey guys, when are we going to end slavery? Um, about the slavery thing, can we end that?
I'm sorry, what? We can't hear you. You're breaking up. Did yeah,
Yeah.
I can't quite hear. Hey, can you bring me some more iced tea? Thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. But you were saying? Um,
Exactly. That's pretty much exactly what's happening. Sadly, Adrian, his wife, who was almost always sick after her time in the different prisons during the Revolution, she becomes gravely ill. It's 1807. She gathers her family around her, and to Lafayette she says, Je suis tout à vous. I'm all yours. And she dies on Christmas Eve. He is devastated. There are like very few love stories that we've mentioned that were as happy and loving as their entire relationship was. And I just wanted to notate her in his story because he actually had a good, lifelong, happy marriage, and his wife was magnificent. And I don't feel like we get to see that a lot in our stories.
no.
Um, So like I said, he's devastated, and despite their circumstances, they're still so in love with each other and so happy. But for the next 15 years, Lafayette does nothing with politics, and he focuses on the remaining estates he has at Lagrange, which is about 43 miles from Paris. In 1818, he takes a seat in the Chamber of Deputies. So in all of this, he has been corresponding with Napoleon, and he initially really likes what Napoleon has to say and what Napoleon's doing. But by the end, and Lafayette's like, "Whoa, bud, pump the brakes. You're getting a little bit ahead of yourself. What you're thinking of is not what the people need. You're gonna need to rework what you're doing." But following the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815, Napoleon abdicates his position as emperor, and on June he does that on June 22nd. So the Battle of Waterloo's June 18, June 22nd, he abdicates. Lafayette had actually made arrangements for Napoleon to go to America, but
Whoa.
which I did not know. And I was like, hold on, what?
Yeah,
Um, but the British authorities intervened and prevented this plan from being implemented. Instead, we know how Napoleon spends his remaining days, but there was a moment he could have been an American citizen. Um,
that's wild.
yeah. Soon after Lafayette returned to Lagrange, he goes back to his private life, but he's always supporting various revolutionary movements throughout Europe, including the Greek Revolution, which I was like, hold on, I need some more information. I'm going to be doing all kinds of research on that
Yeah,
now.
but we just covered the Greek Revolution when I talked about the Parthenon, albeit
Yeah,
briefly.
so I it didn't hit me until like when you were covering the Parthenon, I think because it was a building and not the situation of what I don't know, the whole thing, but when I read that I was like, how can Lafayette be involved in this many things? Like, how can this happen, right? In 1824, another name drop, President James Monroe invites Lafayette to visit the US. Do you know why?
I have no clue at this point. At this point, he could be judging dog shows, and I'd be like, okay,
Doing this Snoop Dogg side quest.
yeah.
Um, it is actually to celebrate the 50th anniversary of an independent nation. And I think that's so cool,
Wow.
right? He arrives in New York on August 15, 1824. He is accompanied by his son, George Washington, and his secretary, Auguste Levasseur. He is greeted by a group of Revolutionary War veterans who he had fought alongside all those years before. He's in New York City for 4 days and nights, and the entire city celebrates with him the whole time. Like they're having the time of their life. While traveling the nation and visiting Boston and Philadelphia, he was celebrated everywhere he went. He visits with John Adams, who by this point is 89 years old. Jackson and Monroe. He visits Monroe at the White House. All the while, he's asking all these guys, "Hey, so when are we going to free the slaves?" Um,
Oh,
Perhaps, it's been 50 years. Do you think we can free the slaves? And finally, at Washington's grave at Mount Vernon, he weeps.
mm.
After laying the cornerstone for the Bunker Hill Monument, he leaves for France on September 8, 1825, aboard the USS Brandywine, named for his first battle.
I had a grandfather who died at the Battle of Brandywine.
Well, he was with Lafayette.
That's really neato.
Lafayette gives his last public speech in January of 1834. The very next month, while suffering from pneumonia, he passes away in Paris at age 77.
Well done there.
So I think I may have worded that wrong. He's suffering from pneumonia. He passes away in May at age 17,
He made it to
77, at
77.
age
Nobody
77.
dies of
Yes.
happiness.
No,
You
but
know what
he
I
made
mean?
it to 77. He is married in, or excuse, buried in the Picpus Cemetery, and his son George sprinkles dirt from Bunker Hill on his grave.
He named his son George.
George Washington.
Holy cow. So George
Yeah, he
Washington
actually,
Lafayette.
yeah, he de Lafayette. I'm sure there's 27 other names in between. He actually had wanted to, when he tried to flee the revolution, wanted to buy property just down the street from George Washington and like set up shop and become a gentleman farmer there as well. In America, after his death, President Andrew Jackson orders the government to remember Lafayette with the same distinction as it gave George Washington upon his death. Members of Congress wear badges commemorating Lafayette for 30 days, and all the chambers of Congress were draped in black bunting.
Wow.
He was granted, oh, I'm not done. He was granted citizenship in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Virginia. And if all of those last lines didn't get you, this one will, I guarantee it.
Okay.
141 years later, and very aware of the date, it was the 4th of July after all, the American army marched through Paris to help oust the Germans. Upon their arrival, so this is World War I, upon their arrival, led by Colonel Stanton and General John Blackjack Pershing, they marched straight to the tomb of the Marquis de Lafayette, where Stanton gives a rousing speech, opening with, I regret I cannot speak to the good people of France in the beautiful language of their own fair country. The fact cannot be forgotten that your nation was our friend when America was struggling for existence, when a handful of brave and patriotic people were determined to uphold the rights their Creator gave them. That France, in the person of Lafayette, came to our aid in words and deeds. It would be ingratitude not to remember this, and America defaults no obligations. He goes on for several more wonderfully patriotic paragraphs, but it's the first few lines and these last ones that absolutely stole my heart. America has joined forces with the Allied powers, and what we have of blood and treasure are yours. Therefore, it is with loving pride that we drape the colors in tribute of respect to the citizen of your great republic. And here and now, in the shadow of the illustrious dead, we pledge our heart and our honor in carrying this war to successful issue. Lafayette, we are here. Pershing says to the response from the crowd, English speaking can hear it and obviously understand it, and they translate it to their friends. He says, quote, it was like a bomb had been hurled into the cemetery and exploded. The feeling was understood, and the applause was deafening.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the story of Lafayette.
Dang. Well
Yeah,
done. I
thank you.
should have known that he had more behind him than a couple of songs in a musical.
So yeah, that's my guy. And the
Oh,
fact that I could end it on Blackjack Pershing's, like, is he gonna be our new National Park Service?
I
How many
mean,
things can he end up in?
yeah. Wow. Wow. Okay, well, I'm in a hard segue. And I have my story is touches on a war we've never covered. And I'm going to say
Oh,
touches,
two
well,
and
I'm going to say
so
touches
few.
on wars, plural, we've never covered.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to cover the defenestrations of Prague.
Okay. I
Now,
like
first,
this.
first off, are because defenestrations is a word that you would use to win at Scrabble. Off the top of your head, do you have an immediate grabbable definition?
My assumptive definition is that it has to do with the defense of
Negative.
Prague, but it could also
Throwing out
mean
the
the,
window.
I was just gonna say, it could also mean the piss pot. So
Yeah, no,
it
no.
could be both.
To den to defenestrate is to throw out a window,
Okay.
which is hilarious that we have a word so succinct, so specific, and not
Did
one
we
that
get it
is
from
well
Germany?
used. You would think because it is such a hyper specific word, but I think this needs to be the word yeeted. I think yeeted needs to be thrown out, and we need to really, grab this with both hands. But either way,
Defenestration.
yes.
Okay. Making sure I can pronounce it. Defenestration.
Okay, so my sources New Advent, the Austro Hungarian monarchy, CzechCenter.com, the defenestration of Prague, Public Domain Review, Windows into History, the Defenestrations of Prague, 1419 to 1997 by Tom Swilwowski.
Hold on. That
Mhm.
from 14 from the years you just gave makes it
Uh-huh.
sound like we threw Prague out the window multiple
Well,
times.
I mean, stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Okay.
So, do you remember how, when I covered the dancing plague, how I said that it was one of multiple dancing plagues that took place in the
Yeah.
region? Okay.
Yeah.
My brain went to that because this is another regional gym
Oh, I love
where
this for us.
this bizarre random occurrence just repeats constantly.
As if it were in a time loop in this area.
Right. And you're like, wait, I'm sorry. How did it happen more than once?
How did it happen at all? Let's start there.
Okay, well, let's start with 1415. Let's go back. So we've got a dude named King Wenzel. He's the son of Charles the Fourth. I'm sure you deeply know. You're like, oh, yeah, that Jim. Well, he has no control over his temper. Okay, zero.
Oh,
Man has no
that
chill.
gem.
He starts a quarrel with the archbishop, and the archbishop refuses to tell him what he's heard in confession.
The archbishop won't tell
Won't tell the
Wenzel.
king. Yeah. So the
Won't tell the
king's
king.
like,
Okay.
this is the modern equivalent of the FBI saying, "Hey, Apple, we need to unlock this iPhone." And
Yeah, yeah.
Apple's
I'm
like,
thinking,
"Kick rocks. I'm not helping you break into things."
yeah, okay, okay, got
Okay?
it. Patient privileges and all that.
Right. So, the archbishop is tortured, then gagged and bound, and at night thrown into a river. And this is the first sign of tension.
Oh, wow. That's only the first sign.
Yeah. So
Okay.
now we've got a dude named Jan Hus, and he hits the scene. He's the child of a peasant, and he's become a professor of philosophy at the University of Prague. And he is a preacher in the Bohemian language at Bethlehem Chapel and the confessor to Queen Sophia.
So that's like a lot.
Yeah, so he's got quite the resume. Now,
Yeah, we sure do.
Huss doesn't follow the Catholic doctrine. And at this point, the nobility is Catholic. They are
Okay.
allowing their people underneath them to practice the religion of their choice, mostly, kind of, sort of. I'll get deeper into that. Um,
That
but
seems to be the reigning, mostly kind of, sort of,
yeah,
you know.
now, but his not following the Catholic doctrine, that gets him in hot water because technically he's Catholic, but he's just like, you know what? I don't, yeah, there's hesitations. And so he's eventually banned by the Pope. He's repeatedly put on trial. He never reneges his belief system. And he's eventually handed over to the secular powers. And the secular powers are like, well, I mean, in accordance to the laws that we have at 1415, you're condemned to death at the stake.
Okay, bye.
And his group of followers are pissed.
And this is because of the secular powers are ticked because he didn't. I think I missed something. Like I get
So
why the church would be mad, but why?
yeah, they hand apparently, I don't know much about 14th the 1400s law in the Czech Republic. Unfortunately. There's holes in my education. Now,
I feel like this is something you should have just known,
right.
Theresa.
I mean,
We're
either way.
Americans, okay?
Yeah. And we measure everything in anything but metric. Um,
Facts.
so whatever the reason, the religious authorities are like, "Hey, yo, state employees, we're going to tag you in." And the state employees are like, "Well, okay, we'll burn him at the stake." Now,
So nonchalant. Wow, okay.
I mean,
All right. Do what you're gonna do, I guess.
so Jan Hus, he's killed for his radical progressive beliefs. And maybe this is part of it, right? Because he wants to have wider education and religious texts available in the Czech language.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, we can't do that. It's
And
Latin or
that's
nothing.
that's 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 a non-starter. Now, this leads to a series of protests against the government and then leads us to the defenestration of government officials. So during the defenestration, there's a dude named Jan Zvlinsky. He's a Hussite priest, as in a follower of
Okay.
Huss. Now, he's leading a group of radical chess Hussites, and they kill 7 members of the city council by yeeting them out the window.
Okay.
Um,
That
now,
feels very grandiose. We couldn't just slit their throats or hang them. We had to chuck them out. That's very symbolic, I think.
it's a very interesting move.
Truly.
I mean, I understand maybe the first going like that, but to do it an additional 6 times is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Now, this ends up being what they call the result of growing discontentment with the Holy Roman Empire, the Catholic Church, and the inequality that we have between the peasantry
Oh,
and the Catholic noblemen.
okay.
So things just continue to ratchet up as the tension continues to increase. That whole situation, that's the first defenestration of Prague. And King Wenzel, our dude, is so, quote, excited by the episode, he was struck with apoplexy and died.
What is apoplexy?
Shock, stroke, aneurysm, like apoplexy.
All the things. Okay.
His soul
I'm
just yeets
so
itself from his body upon hearing these words.
I can just visualize that happening. Thank you for that.
You ever got news and you're like, I'm just going to clock out. I'm just done. That's what the King Wenzel actually does. He just punches his own time card and deuces.
Peace. I didn't want to go to dinner tonight anyway.
Yep. This kicks off the Hussite Wars.
Of course it does.
But we're going to fast forward. I don't want to get hung up in the wars. 1483, under the reign of King Vladislaus of Hungary, the Hussites overthrow the Catholic governments of Old, New, and Lesser towns, which I feel like show that, again, we're bad at naming things. If the name
Truly.
is Old Town, New Town, Lesser Town, and
We
they,
really could have been more British in our namings if we're gonna do that.
I
Jeez.
mean,
New
good
York, New
grief.
York.
They also throw the Old Town councillor out the window and, quote, he was joined by 7 New Town councillors.
Okay, now they're just doing it for fun.
Yeah, but the Czech just ain't ready to check yeeting peeps out windows. They have a legacy to protect.
Yeah, they do.
And
It's
that
just,
leads
geez.
to the 1618 defenestration of Prague.
I took Prague seriously until now.
That makes one of us. So, but before we hit 1618, I got to give you some more context. Now, most of the sources that I got my hands on, they skip immediately to just the events, but they don't necessarily give you that extra context. So allow me. 1526, the Kingdom of Bohemians governed by the Habsburg kings, because the Habsburgs have
Of
got to
course.
enter the scene. They're not going to force their Catholic religion on their largely Protestant subjects, okay? In 1609, Rudolph II, Holy Roman Emperor, and also King of Bohemia, uh,
He
he
had he had the Vonage manuscript.
he had the Vonage manuscript. So this is some more background on his politics. Um, he increased Protestant rights and actually cared about what his people had access to the abilities to do. Now, he's increasingly viewed as unfit to govern. Maybe it was the
Of
Vonage
course.
manuscript that slowly drove him insane. The other members of the Habsburg dynasty actually declared that his younger brother, Matthias, should be the family head, and that happens in 1606. Matthias gradually wrestles territory away from Rudolph, beginning with Hungary. And in 1609, to strengthen his hold on Bohemia, Rudolph issues what is called as the Letter of Majesty, which grants Bohemia's largest Protestant estates to exercise the freedoms of religion. So they can practice religion of choice. And this basically sets up the Protestant Bohemian state church that's controlled by these estates.
Okay.
Okay. So there's religious freedoms officially. Now, when the Holy Roman Emperor dies, Matthias takes over. Small problem. Matthias, he's aging, he's without children, and he makes his cousin Ferdinand of Styria his heir and elected him king in 1617.
Okay.
Now, Ferdinand, he's problematic at best. He's a proponent of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. There's two things he doesn't like: Protestants and Bohemian freedoms.
I feel like him and Mary Stuart would have been like great friends.
Probably.
Well, I'm sorry, not Mary Stuart, Mary Tudor. Sorry. Carry on.
Oh, yeah, actually, I agreed too early, but you're right. 1618, Ferdinand, he's got some big feelings and is done with this entire people group that he just can't abide. He orders the chapels that are being built on the royal land to stop. And the Bohemian states, they start to protest this order. So he just dissolves their entire assemblies,
Oh, okay.
which,
Well, we had freedoms for a little bit. Okay.
and he's like, but I'm king. Kick rocks.
Did
Now,
somebody yeet him out the window?
no. But there's other
Hmm.
things that occur. Okay. So at this point, two Catholic deputies, Yaroslav Borita of Martinice and Wilhelm Slavata of Klum. They've grown notorious for openly disavowing the letters of majesty. Um, the Rudolph II, his liberal guarantee of religious tolerance. So when the Protestant assembly spurned by the shattered chapels in these two estates, they attract a massive crowd. And this is when Martinice and Slavata, they're starting to worry. They're starting to wring their hands a little bit. And that's when there's a count who comes on the scene. Yenrik Matthias Thurn. He's elected defender of the Protestant faith, and he's called for
Hmm.
these guys' execution.
Of course.
You know,
Via window.
the Catholic deputies, they've overplayed their hand. The mood among the people is a bit anxious, bit angry, bit you
Up in
know,
arms a little bit, if you
mob with
will.
pitchforks. And the Catholic, or so the large crowd, they follow these Protestant nobles to Hardcany Castle. They poured inside the upper floors, cornering Martinice and Slavata into the tower chamber. They're shouting, threatening, grabbing at the deputies. Then they chuck Martinice out the window first. Slavata, meanwhile, he's holding on to the edge and he's begging for the Virgin's intercession.
Of course.
Now, in one final push, the crowd expels him from the castle window as well. Only the deputy secretary remained. Now, this dude is shaking with fear. He's clinging to one of the Protestant noblemen for protection. But the defenestrators, as they would become to call him or come to be called, they peel him off and they yeet him out the window as well. Now,
Okay.
I feel it's important to mention this because there were several accounts I read that only talked about the two noblemen getting tossed, but they fail to mention the poor guy that is just earning a paycheck.
I'm sorry that that happened to him.
Now, the exuberant Protestant rebels, they're mocking these appeals to the Virgin Mary because they're Protestant. But two of them lean out the window to heap more insults upon the shattered bodies below because this is the third floor. And they stop because Martinice and Slavata are alive, as is their secretary. And in fact, they're already getting to reach for a ladder that's been extended from one of the lower windows by allies in the castle. That's a weird part of the story because why go back into the house where you were literally just had an assassination
Chucked out the
attempt?
window.
Why is there a ladder in the house? Am I decorating wrong?
I feel like maybe somebody else already knew that this was a potentiality.
And then it's like, and I also haven't mentioned the fact that they fell out of a third story window and lived, when typically this is the end it button. So
Maybe they,
any thoughts on
maybe
how they survived the fall?
voluminous clothing that captured the air and made their landing smoother. Of
The Catholic propaganda at the time insists that it's the Virgin Mary who saved him and that
course.
Slavata's prayer for intercession works. The Protestant pamphleteers, on the other hand, they note that these guys landed in a pile of trash and human shit directly below the window that broke their fall. How big
So,
is the pile of poop that caused them to survive a 30-foot at lowest drop?
and no broken bones, anything like that?
They were reaching for a ladder, so obviously legs were fine. I mean,
So thinking legs
unclear.
and arms and fine.
I'm
Yeah.
unsure of their war wounds from this situation, but regardless of whether it's a miracle or coincidence or both, um, this is what would kick off the 30 Years' War, which
A
is
pile
another
of
war.
shit.
And I'm like, we haven't touched on that one either. Now, news of the defenestration of Prague, as it's come to be known, like when you hear defenestration of Prague, this is the event that you're typically
Okay.
hearing about. This travels across Europe within the year. And there's images and woodblock cuts and like all this stuff created, throwing or showing the yeeting of peeps out the window. And this radicalizes everyone. And this ends up serving as a touchstone for Czech national identity and of Prague's municipal history. And it's reinvoked so many times that it gradually kind of becomes abstract and almost a figure of speech in their world. But yeeting officials out the window doesn't die out in the olden days.
Please tell
1948,
me. Oh, yeah.
there's another Jan Masaryk. He's found below the bathroom window of the Czechoslovak Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, uh, the official report lists his death as suicide, but it's largely believed that this guy was murdered either by the communist government, in which he served as a nonpartisan foreign minister, or by Soviet secret services. In 2004, there's a Prague police report that concludes that after forensic research, at least one other person was involved in this man's death. The report seems largely collaborated in 2006 when a Russian journalist said that his mother knew the Russian intelligence officer who defenestrated this man. However, more recent investigation opened in 2019 again called those findings into question when new research claiming that Masaryk fell not from a bathroom window, but from the adjacent exterior ledge. So he wasn't hanging out the bathroom window. He was on the edge of the roof. Now, this investigation is shelved in 2021 with investigators citing a lack of sufficient evidence to make conclusive determinations regarding the events of Masaryk's death.
Hmm.
But that is the last defenestration of Prague that at least is included in this story.
I need to know if there's some sort of festival every year where they just chuck things out the window in honor of their own history.
That's delightful. That thought process is delightful. But
Right? I feel like that should be a thing.
the entire time I was reading about this story, all I could hear in the back of my mind, right in college, I worked for a Boy Scout camp because I was a registered Boy Scout until I was like 21, 25, one of those years, which is a story unto itself. But one of the songs we would sing at camp is we would start singing a song, and then one of the camp staffers would be, and we threw it out the window, the second story window, with a heave and a hoe and a mighty throw. We threw it out the window. And so
So
that was
here's how we learned the
nonstop.
Boy Scouts started in Prague.
That would be hilarious.
I, what a wild day we have had.
Yeah.
Wow. Viva la revolution. And if you're gonna do it, chuck it out the window. Give the old yeet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. I love this for me.
It was so bizarre to be like, wait a minute, it happened again and again. Do we not have swords or guns or clubs or poison?
Or literally anything else? Is there
Yeah.
another option? Can you imagine like being alive in those times and going, oh, they've done it again.
His name is
Frog's on their
Jan.
shit again.
Could you imagine? It's like you're in Prague, your name is Jan. You're going to be thrown out a window.
It's just the way it is, okay?
Yeah, you
Your
know
mom
what?
must have loved you.
Yeah. Oh, she named you Jan. You better avoid Prague. Just avoid it
Bye.
altogether because they've got windows.
And they've got big feels about people named Jan.
Yeah.
Look, we don't make the rules. It is what it is. I love this. Thank you for this.
Mhm.
You've made my entire day.
So if you've enjoyed this and you're thinking this has made your entire day and your name is not Jan, you do not live in Prague, but you have big feelings and could yeet things out windows, and you're thinking, I'm going to share this with my friend named Jan because he needs to know to avoid Prague, then rate, review, subscribe, and share it with poor Jan. And on that note, goodbye.
Bye.